moment on behalf of the Belvidere Board of Education to welcome everyone here tonight for our Regionalization Feasibility Study meeting. For those of you that don't know, this is technically a special Belvidere meeting. The meeting is only about the Regionalization Feasibility Study. Any public comment should be only on the Regionalization Feasibility Study. If you have any comments, we have a meeting next week, April 16th. See you there. So any questions tonight? Dr. Green, Mr. Magyar will be happy to answer them. Having seen the presentation pretty much twice through, I'm confident that most of the questions will be answered by Dr. Green as he presents. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up Dr. Ken Green. For those of you that don't know Ken, Ken is somewhat of a local person. Ken lives in Easton now, but he was the superintendent up in Newton for many years. He began his teaching career in White Township and worked also in Phillipsburg for a while. So Ken knows the area very well. Mr. Magyar worked for Senator Sweeney as one of his main policy writers. Mark was actually the person that wrote, if I get it wrong, but Mark will tell you, but wrote the bill basically that allowed for the regionalization study. So you're in great hands tonight with two very qualified individuals to talk about regionalization. So without further ado, Dr. Green.
Appreciate that warm welcome, but wait till you hear what we have to say before you decide to apply. Okay, thank you very much. It's good to be here at Belvidere High School. As Mr. Krug has said, I did start my career in White. I'm also a grandparent to students in Harmony Township School. I've known the area, grew up in Lapacon, not only served in Phillipsburg, but also in North Warren before I ended my career 13 years at Newton as a superintendent. So I've had my whole career here in Northwest Jersey. Feel like it's a coming home moment. And so I'm glad to see the number of folks who are here and interested in discussing the work that has been done. And this study has been basically, as the title says, looking at the feasibility or the possibility for regionalization, but also for other things. And so we want to talk about those other things as well. What we intend with this presentation, I hope it's going to go about 40-45 minutes. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end. We'll have a microphone. I know this is being live streamed or recorded, so others who couldn't make it tonight should be able to access this presentation. In addition to that, the study itself has already been posted on the websites of all the districts, so it's available for your reading. And I will talk about ways to go about that reading because it is a rather lengthy document in a moment as we go to this. But there's really going to be three parts of our presentation tonight. First is just some introductory statements about the process that we've gone through, and it's really been a very collaborative process with a group of stakeholders that we refer to as a steering committee, which was made up of administrators, superintendents and business administrators from all 5 of the districts involved in the study, as well as board representatives from each, number of whom are here tonight. So I thank you for your work, your efforts, a lot of reading, a lot of thinking about how this should move forward. And so we really appreciate your efforts in doing so. And so an introductory material, then we're going to talk about the key findings of the study, and finally, what are the major recommendations that we're offering, and then we'll have a Q&A period after that. So we'll start with some questions, and these are questions that are frequently asked, but the answers are specific to you and this study. So the process, how long do they take? They typically take 9 to 12 months. This one took 13 months from the draft outline that we started with the steering committee in January of 2024 until we submitted a final report in February of this year. There's a reason that I'll explain later why it took a couple extra months, perhaps longer than it should. It has to do with some work we were trying to do in the state of New Jersey to get some answers to a really important question. Again, we'll get to that. What are the costs of the participating school districts? There are no financial costs. This is entirely funded by a state grant, which was created as a result of the work that Mr. Magyar and the legislature did to create the school regionalization law that's in effect now and was began in 2022. The commitment from the districts was really for the stakeholders to gather data and provide input. The value of being lead district or a partner, actually all 5 districts were partners in this study, and so they all got to participate as part of that steering committee making the decisions about what went on with the study. The decisions being, what exactly were we going to study, and then looking at a draft and commenting on that. And how did the study consider unique aspects? Because we do have a model study that we utilize, but it is open and flexible to the needs of the districts. And so we'll talk about how that came about and how that showed itself here with this cluster. In fact, the second statement here, the most important of these in terms of ranges of options to be studied and was wanting to be looked at was consideration of a combined middle school program for grades 6 through 8. Was studied through sort of 2 different lenses. One, if the districts have regionalized and have one district. And another way that it could happen if the districts wanted to expand the send and receive agreements which already exist specifically between Harmony, Hope, and White and Belvidere to look at a combined program. What happens after the presentation is finished? Certainly the districts can consider any of the recommendations that they would like to pursue, potentially through a referendum vote if regionalization is a consideration, and we would be available to offer assistance with that. And another frequently asked question is regionalization required after this? And the answer is no. The requirement in the statute is for the participants to make a good faith effort. As with many things, if you're familiar with the New Jersey Constitution and education, it calls for a thorough and efficient education, and we've been arguing for, I don't know, 60 years about what that actually means. So I don't know that we know exactly what a good faith effort means, but I think it would at least mean considering, as we are here, a public presentation, some discussion by the boards of education, and at least some consideration of the recommendations. So those are generally some questions that we might get asked. So our study has 4 sections to it. There's a section which looks at governance and law, a section which looks at demographics. You may be familiar with demographic studies as it applies to facility enhancement, a building project. Typically you have demographic studies done. We have that done by our demographer. And then the 2 biggest pieces we're looking at is education and program and finance and operations, because these are really the 2 main considerations when you're looking at the potential for regionalization and or expanded shared services, which is something else we looked at. Because it's, does it make education better for kids? Is it more efficient for us financially? Those are the 2 big pieces. So you will see as you read through the report, those are the 2 biggest parts of the report. The study team members, and I just wanted to let you know that there were many folks involved. Mark Magyar, again, is here today, the director of the Sweeney Center for Public Policy, through which this study was done. I served as the lead investigator and focused a lot of my attention on the education and program piece, but I oversaw the work of all of the sections. And I won't go through all the folks here, but you may recognize a couple of names, perhaps Lucille Davey, former Commissioner of Education in New Jersey. She is also an attorney, did the work on the governance and law section, but also aided the education program. And you can see a number of folks in finance and operations, because again, that's a very key piece for us. Just a little more on the scope of work. We did start in January. We worked through the spring and into the summer to produce the various aspects of this. And then in February, made recommendations based on the analysis. And what looks to be a fairly large gap between September and February is where I said we had to pause for a couple of months as we looked at a particular facet of a state decision, and again, we'll talk more about that as we get through. And here we are presenting our findings to you. So when we met with the steering committee to design the study, we came out with 4 scenarios that would be studied. Requirements of the law are that you at least study 2 scenarios, and those are number 1 and number 4. The first being consolidating all the districts who are part of the study into one full-purpose, all-purpose regional school district for students in grades pre-K to 12. So that's a requirement. Also, maintaining the status quo, because it may just be the desire that after hearing what's presented and considering it for some time, you may decide that the current arrangements in way of the districts as they exist, with the boards as they exist, is what the communities would prefer. We offer some number of examples in here of potential expansion or addition of shared services. So there's ways to work together that don't necessarily require regionalization, and again, ways that would make education better for kids and the financial side more efficient. A few things that are important to understand. Number one, we studied the scenarios that we just identified. We didn't study 12 or 15 or lots of different, we had to focus ourselves somewhere, and these were the areas in which, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to. Let me go back a step. I said 1 and 4, and I didn't tell you 2 and 3. I figured I'd get called out on that one. Number 2 is the one that I referred to earlier about revising send-receive agreements, or potentially through regionalization, to send all grades 6 through 8 students to a combined middle school program. Interesting that recently I learned, and I think recently it happened, that as Hope Township and White Township are putting their budgets together, that in the budgets that are yet to be fully approved, both groups are interested in Hope Township sending its 6th through 8th graders to White Township. And so part of that, certainly I know a part of that is financial situations that are compelling some very difficult decisions. But also I know that the participants who have been talking about this for quite some time, way longer than the study has been going on. But we're aware of the findings of the study several months ago, and certainly they coincide with that decision. So we wish the districts well in that, and certainly would be ready to work with them if there are questions or concerns. And then number 3 here is a discussion also that's been going on probably for 15, 20 years, and for those who've been around perhaps longer than that, on and off, is that as we have seen declines in student enrollment, not just at Belvidere High School, but across all of the districts of this cluster. We're going to take a look at that in a moment. That there has been talk at times, is Belvidere High School too small? Should we consider closing it? Is that an option? And so the steering committee said, well, rather than continuing to just punt that ball around, why don't you take a look at that and give us your thoughts on that? And we did do that, and we certainly will do that as we move forward here. So again, back to important to understand, we studied the scenarios there. Second thing is, the data is a snapshot in time. Most of the data we gathered was from last summer and was mostly 2023-24 data. But it doesn't matter. Anytime you do this kind of work, you're taking a snapshot in time. That data is going to change. The projections are just that. They're not predictions of what exactly will happen, but they're projections based on the data we have today. Certainly, if there are legal issues that are raised here, each of the school districts has a board attorney, and you would want to run those issues by that person. And know that implementation of any recommendation in the study would need to be based on a decision of the relevant boards of education, and or in the case of a regionalization, by vote of each community who was interested in pursuing that. So nothing's going to be decided here tonight. Nothing's going to be decided at the very next board meeting. I think you're going to see that these are discussions that are going to go on for some time. So that's the first part of the presentation. The second part, a little bit longer, is the key findings, and when we get to the major recommendations, that will be pretty quick for us. So the key findings, we're doing this in the 4 domains of the study. So we start with governance and law, and we look at regional voting, because that's a question that gets asked, well, how does that work? And so the effort that would be made here, if we were talking about the Belvidere cluster, and when I refer to the Belvidere cluster, I'm talking about Hope, Harmony, White, and Belvidere as a cluster of districts that work together as a K-12. When we involve Great Meadows into the study, we'll specify that. And Great Meadows, as for those of you who are in the Belvidere cluster are unfamiliar, Great Meadows currently sends its students to Hackettstown High School. They are pre-K to 8 regional with 2 schools, actually a 3rd school that's currently unutilized, but they're thinking about that. And they had pursued some discussions with Hackettstown, and those at the time that this study was starting were not fruitful, and so they decided to look at, well, what would the options be for us if we looked to join with the Belvidere cluster. So each of the investigations that we did, the scenarios that I talked about before, were done with Great Meadows and also without Great Meadows, so we could see both of those pieces. And we'll talk about where that went. But forming a new regional, which is what would have to happen for the Belvidere cluster, would be submitted to the voters in each of the municipalities that choose to participate in the referendum. Right, so there's 4 municipalities: Belvidere, Harmony, Hope, White. If all 4 chose to participate in the referendum, it would be submitted to the voters in all 4 municipalities. The second bullet point here will be adopted if a majority of the votes in each one of the local districts agree to form a new regional district. And the third bullet point that would be obvious: if voters in any one of those communities fail to approve it, the referendum would not pass. Okay? So that's how that works. Now, there is a scenario in which not all 4 would choose to do that. Perhaps one of them would say, look, we are not interested in participating. These would be decisions made by the Board of Education, by the way, to decide whether to participate in the referendum. So if there were only 3 districts, then all 3 districts would vote, all 3 districts would have to pass, they would become the new regional district. The one that didn't participate would continue as a send and receive district as they currently are. Right? So those are some potential options that would be there. If Great Meadows were to take part in this, they would be required to apply to the Commissioner of Education first to withdraw from its agreement with Hackettstown, and that is fraught with some concerns, which we'll share later, before it could pursue joining a new regional district. The other alternative there would be that Great Meadows is already a regional district, and the decision could be made to enlarge that regional district to include others. As I note there, it would be more complicated. We didn't really get into all the ins and outs of that, but that is also a possibility. So there's multiple ways that regional voting could go on in order to have a regionalization. In a regional effort, you can see that board composition would certainly change. You are familiar with 9-member boards, and some districts have 10 or 11 board members, but most of them have 9. So you're familiar among these 5 of having at least 45 to 50 board members. If there was a regionalization, the likelihood would be a 9-member board. That's the typical configuration, and you can see the number of board members who would be assigned. Now, if you look at the one without Great Meadows, it has White with 4 and Belvidere with 2, which seems unusual because Belvidere is the K-12 district. And if you look at populations, they actually have similar populations, Belvidere and White. But this is not based on student population. It is based on the population of the municipality. So if you're familiar with White Township, Brookfield, and some other developments which have lots of folks who don't have kids in school, change that dynamic. And so that's why you see that without Great Meadows. With Great Meadows, for those who are unfamiliar, has 2 municipalities, Independence and Liberty. Each of them would have 2 elected board members by those calculations, White with 2. And so clearly the result for everyone is that you would have fewer board members from your own township. That's just a fact of the matter. That could be a good thing, and that sometimes it's difficult, when you have a 9-member board, to try to get board members to fill all of the spots, particularly in small communities such as ours. But that's certainly a factor that you want to consider, because you definitely would have fewer, certainly, than 9 from each community. In terms of middle school and shared services, as we stated, the existing send and receive agreements with Belvidere could be expanded. These would be decisions to be considered by each Board of Education. So bringing together students into a middle school and changing the send and receive agreements does not require a referendum. That is not a public vote. Those are decisions made by the Board of Education. And of course, it would need to be decisions made by a sending board and a receiving board, at least for 2 boards to bring their students together. As I aforementioned, Hope and White, those are decisions that those 2 boards of education would be making. In terms of shared services, that is also something created through administrative working together, but the boards of education also approve those contracts for shared services, and that would require them to be developed and created together. So on those other pieces, we talked about regionalization before, now the middle school piece, and then the shared services piece. So that's the governance and law side. That's a small portion. We're going to move to the demographics. Right here, what's being shown, I know it may not be easy to see, but the blue line at the top of this chart is the combination of the orange and green lines, orange representing births over the past 10 years in Belvidere, the Belvidere cluster, and in Great Meadows. And in the Belvidere area, they've been averaging about 83 per year, which is about an addition of 4 over what has normally been the case prior. And in Great Meadows, it's 2 more over the last 6 years. So these are minor changes, but the good thing is that they're more. That's an important piece, because as we get to see further in demography, we haven't had such great demography over the last 20 years. The data also indicated at the time that we conducted it last spring and summer that there were no planned major housing developments in any of the 6 municipalities at this time. Again, that could change. We know that's subject to change almost at any time. This is the enrollment history that I was referring to. This is not typically part of our study to look back 20 years, but I happen to know the history of the 20 years because I've been tracking it. And so if you look, we have each of the school populations and a total for the Belvidere cluster. Then we have each of the school populations in the Great Meadows district and a total for that region, and then the total together. Highlighted in red, because over the past 20 years, virtually all of your communities have lost about the same percentage of enrollment. Over 20 years, 40% of the enrollment has declined in these communities. You may be already aware and have felt that, but the data actually shows it has been 40%, a total together. You can see at the school level for the Belvidere cluster, they're all relatively the same. It's not happening in any one particular community. In Great Meadows, it looks odd, and the reason it looks odd, those numbers there, is because over those 20 years, Great Meadows has changed which grade levels go to which schools. And so that has skewed what happens between the elementary and the middle school. The truth of the matter, though, is if you look at the whole region, you're talking about going from 1,038 in 2003-04 down to 650 in 23-24, and this is just the Great Meadows pre-K to 8. This does not include the high school students. But it's 37%. When you put those two together, 40% over those 20 years. Now, the good news is that when you look at this last segment from 2018-19 to 2023-24, those enrollment declines slowed to 13.7% in the Belvidere cluster and a little over 9% in Great Meadows. That's at the bottom there. So we're not seeing continuous 40%. We're seeing this slow. And the good news is yet to follow. Because the enrollment projections for the Belvidere cluster in pre-K to 8 are that over the next 5 years that enrollment goes from 849 to 923 students. Doesn't sound like a lot, but any movement in the positive is really positive, okay? Because small size can get to the point where it really impacts the effectiveness and efficiency of the program that you can put together. In Great Meadows, similarly, we see an uptick from 673 up to 701, slight decline in that last year. But if you look from the first year to the last year, you're still seeing a growth of some 20-some students. Again, not huge numbers, but the direction is positive. If we look at how that looks for grades 9 through 12 in the Belvidere cluster, we see again a real good trend. That last year shows a bit of a drop-off. This is a factor of, this is calculated, by the way, by births expected based on historical trends, and also year-over-year grade level continuous. So you see that last year, but even if we took that last year as a year, again, more students than in a 24-25 prediction. Great Meadows, similar for grades 9 through 12 and their students, a little bit of a dip to start, but then an increase. So the good news is across all of the districts, we are expecting and projecting that there will be student increases, which is a good thing. So for the concerns that people are having today and looking at enrollments today, know that our projections are that that will change. When we look at enrollment capacity, so there's two kinds of capacities we're going to look at: facility capacity and enrollment capacity. Facility capacity we'll look at later, which is where we actually look at the actual enrollment and the number of rooms the school has, regular classrooms. We divide that out and we come up with what the facility has in terms of a capacity. When we talk about enrollment capacity, what we wanted to share was going back to that 20-year data, where we've had 40% fewer students today than we did 20 years ago. If we said, and we did say to ourselves, let's assume for the moment that that capacity in 2003-04, that was the high water mark of enrollment in these districts. Now I know it isn't, because heard discussion before of going to school probably before that time, and there were 600 students at Belvidere High School at one time, right? So we could go back before 2003. The state doesn't keep data much back before 1998. We could have gone back, but it doesn't change the point that if you look at 2003-04 as a high watermark, well, we've lost 40% of enrollment, so we clearly have capacity for other students. Now, that said, we know over 20 years things change. Rooms get utilized. Special education has changed to the point that we're using many of these rooms as small classrooms. Like, a lot of things have changed. Technology's changed. We know that. So the enrollment capacity check is just sort of an interesting exercise. The real exercise is when we do the facility capacity. If you combine the enrollment capacities at Belvidere Elementary and Belvidere High School, in other words, the 40% that's been lost by those two schools, Belvidere High School would, it would enable the 4 districts in the cluster to consider a revised center-receive relationship to place all grades 6 through 8 students at this site. And we'll verify that at the facility level. It is also true that White Township has additional capacity, so I know they're going to be able to take on the Hope students. If we did a cluster-wide middle school approach with White, they would have enough room for at least the 7th and 8th grade students. So that's another potential configuration that certainly could be thought about. Hope and Harmony, the schools are small enough that they would not be suitable for the grades 6 through 8. Combining Great Meadows into this cluster produces a district of 2,212 students by 2028-29. That's a nice sized district. When you think of some of the larger districts in the area, Phillipsburg has out of 4,000 students, Warren Hills probably has 3,200 students, so it's still not a large district. If all of these districts combine, it still would be considered actually a medium-sized district. And Great Meadows Middle School would be sufficiently large from an enrollment perspective to house a middle school program as well. That would probably rely on the opening of the Liberty Township School, and I know, there's discussions whether that's something that Great Meadows would like to do. But there's multiple options there for a middle school. And the data that we gathered and analyzed said that the joining of these 5 school districts would not create any significant demographic or enrollment changes. Yes, a larger enrollment, but not significant changes among the demographic groups. That would not be an issue. We did mention before, though, that there are some issues with Great Meadows, and the issue for Great Meadows is that Great Meadows students make up a significant proportion, about 35% of the students that go to Hackettstown High School. Removing those students from Hackettstown High School would be a major change to that school's population from a total standpoint. If you look at the middle table there, you would also see a demographic change, a significant one racially, between white and Hispanic students. You see in those cases. If you look at the others, they're not such stark numbers, but certainly those are very stark numbers and would result in a really different Hackettstown High School. And if you look at the bottom, FRL is free and reduced lunch. That's our data point for economic disadvantage, and ELL, English language learner. And again, you see significant differences between the Great Meadows population and the others in Hackettstown. So we deemed at the time when we got to the end of the demographic analysis that we are charged with, if we see anything like this, we need to stop the study, we need to let the state know before we move forward. And we worked on that together. Fortunately, the state said, all right, we're aware of that, and ultimately the Commission of Education would have to make that decision, but go forth with the study, which was really great because we were able to provide Great Meadows not only with demographic information, which is helpful, but also to take a look at some of the educational and financial pieces as well. The tax levy and state aid calculations that we're going to get to are relevant regardless of of joining with these districts or not. So that's available. All right, the last two, again, the important parts from an education standpoint, what does it do for kids, and what are we looking at financially? So from a curriculum and instruction standpoint, our analysis of the coursework that's offered, the resources that are used, the time that's devoted to schoolwork in the K-8s shows that White, Hope, Harmony, and Belvidere really have very dissimilar experiences. There's not a single approach to how many hours we spend on English language arts a week, or textbook resources and coordinate those. Those could be done, and certainly we would, if regionalization is not something that is appealing, certainly we would, one of our recommendations would be further work in that area to bring the programs more together, so that instead of having 4 different 8th grades joining Belvidere High School, they sort of have more like one program. And so certainly in a single district, a regional district, that's much easier to accomplish because you're not dealing with different boards, different administrators, different teaching approaches, etc. I think we can all understand that. Certainly having those students have shared experiences entering high school could offer multiple benefits. Again, if Great Meadows joined the group, that's another set of dissimilar experiences where there would have to be work done to create some synergies there. Certainly a centralized curriculum office increases the efficiency with which resources are used. There's no question about that. And shared educational programs in grades K to 8 can contribute to some more cohesive and effective approaches. Now, so those sound like general statements, but those are also born out of the data we looked at, test score data, other outcome data, interviews with administrators, curriculum folks, special education folks, teachers at both the 8th grade and the 9th grade level, right, that transition point. So there's a lot of data gathering that went in. They sound like general points, but they ring true here. Again, you can get a lot of those benefits by closer working together, and your districts, in particular the Belvidere cluster, but also Great Meadows, have done a tremendous job in terms of bringing personnel together. We'll talk about that in just a moment, where you've gone with staffing. And so some of those efficiencies are being found. Obvious sign of collaboration in the Belvidere clusters, you have one special services director who services the entire cluster. You also have a superintendent who serves Belvidere and Harmony. You have a business administrator who does the same, and another business administrator who serves Hope and White. You have the part-time curriculum coordinator who's working with all of the districts. Great Meadows superintendent is also the child study team director. I mean, there's all kinds of sharing of stuff already going on, which is tremendous. So you've done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the efficiencies that you can find, and there are a few more parts to go with the regionalization, but not as many as many other clusters would have. When we're looking at the second bullet point, we're looking at projecting staffing needs. It is a given in this study that all existing schools would remain open and operate, with most of the school level positions remaining as they presently do. There's nothing in here in this study about, well, what happens if we close this school or that school. The only one is about Belvidere High School, and that was explicit at the start of the investigation, but not about others. And so that's not even being considered here. That would be something, certainly, if there was a regional board, could consider that years on down the road. And even individual boards could make some decisions, as Hope is making with their 6th through 8th grade students. So all of those things could, certainly could happen, but they're not being considered here in the study. I did say there's a great deal of role sharing already happening, but despite that, there are administrative tasks that are replicated over and over in the the 5 districts. So just because you have shared administrators in Belvidere and Harmony, you still have to do 2 budgets. You still have to do 2 QSAC monitorings. You still have to hire 2 sets of attorneys and auditors and all of those things. So combining the administration certainly helps, but there's lots of replicated tasks. And in these 5 communities, it's done 5 times. 5 budgets, 5 QSACs, all that stuff gets done over and over, where it would be much smoother and more efficient if it were done once. With the combined middle school, really the major reason for doing so is an educational reason. It's just simply impossible for smaller schools, such as we have in the cluster here, to provide the kind of full educational program that a combined middle school would offer. In fact, if the grade levels were combined in the Belvidere cluster, there would be about 275 students. That's a sufficient size for a school to really be offering some of these rich programs to those students. With Great Meadows, that would be 500 students, an even richer approach. And Great Meadows already has its own middle school. Did we look at the back and forth between? Yes, we did. What if the decision was made again either through existing send receive being enlarged or regionalized, that the Belvidere cluster sent its 6th through 8th to Great Meadows. Well, the problem educationally there is you're sending them from one school to another district and then back to another high school. Multiple transitions, not really good, particularly for middle-aged students. And the same would be true if we were to think about Great Meadows sending its students to Belvidere or White or somewhere here. It would be the same back and forth. And so we really focused with the combined middle school program largely on the Belvidere cluster. You would have a more efficient placement or sharing of teaching staff. That would certainly be true. And a greater access, as we said, to higher quality programs. You'd be able to provide a higher program and probably be able to do it more efficiently. In fact, we're going to show you a middle school model. That was a specific request at the end of the study from your steering committee to say, hey, you didn't really look at what would a middle school model look like? How would that cost out? So we did that. We're going to show you those results in just a moment. Education program from a Belvidere High School perspective. So now we dive into, what about closing Belvidere High School? So when we compared the enrollment size to course offerings, and just compared Belvidere High School to Hackettstown High School, Belvidere has 36% of the enrollment of Hackettstown, but offers about 80% of the program. That's huge. That's huge, that the school is still able to provide a strong, healthy program. When you make those comparisons to bigger schools like Warren Hills and Phillipsburg, the data get even more skewed. The data are even more in Belvidere's favor with regard to that. The Belvidere High School has a robust program of dual credit, 21 courses offering a potential total of 79 college credits. So students have the opportunity here to get college credits, which would lead to some less expensive opportunities moving forward. When you look at extracurricular offerings and compare several high schools, Belvidere students actually have more opportunities per student than their peers. You would think a school that's 3 or 4 times the size would offer 3 or 4 times the number of extracurricular activities. Not true. And we counted all of them, whether they have a freshman, a JV, a varsity, we counted them all. And when you count them all up, Belvidere High School students, a little over 300 of them, participated in activities, 998 activities, an average of 3.2 per student. That is well above the activity ratio at the larger schools. So the bottom line is this is not an easy decision when you're offering a quality program here. We know that it can be difficult, but just looking at the educational piece here does not yield confidence by us that that would be a good move. And that's aside, certainly that's the educational component. That's aside from the social and emotional decision that would have to be made to close a high school that has been here for generations and has served families who have lived here for a long, long time. That's a very difficult decision. And so the education and program piece, again, supports that. That would be pretty complicated, and we're not confident that there would be greater opportunities. So that was the education program piece. To the last one. get to your questions and stop talking. But this part obviously is important, the finance piece. So the state aid component is probably best seen by the chart here. These are the 5 communities and the state aid projections over the next 4 years. Looking at the 5 communities, going from 2024-25 up to 2028-29. The purple is Great Meadows, and the brown is Hope Township. I point the 2 of them out because they would be we're projecting them to experience significant aid increases due to enrollment growth and adequacy budget changes in what constitutes an adequate budget for those schools. And you say, well, Hope, how could that be? Well, Hope's small enough that they add 20 or 30 students. That's a lot of kids for Hope, right? And that engenders a good deal more of state aid. What we're seeing with Belvidere is gradual declines. And when you go and look in the study, you'll see all the reasoning for this. This is built on a lot of look at data. And Harmony and White seeing modest growth. Harmony, by the way, Belvidere is in the sort of aqua color, starting at 2.7 down to 2.1. And Harmony and White are down to green and blue at the bottom, so fairly static with some growth in categorical aid. Categorical aid is things for specific purposes like transportation or security, special education, those items. So looking at those, that's the picture for each of the 5 separately. Well, what happens when we combine the 5? Well, when we combine the 5, what we refer to as the all potential constituents scenario, that's the blue. So with that sharp increase for Great Meadows and Hope, that's carrying through and 2 districts that are kind of flat, Belvidere slight decline, it carries through to an increase from 6.4 million in 26-27. We cut this to a 3-year period because 2026 might be the first possible opportunity for regionalization to happen, right? That's not happening in September. Like at the very least, even if all speed were taken, at the very least it wouldn't be until 2026. So you see 3 years there, a consistent growth. What you also see here, unfortunately, in the purple, is what would happen under a regional situation and how state aid would be calculated. You can see it's considerably less than if the districts were to remain separate. In fact, by 28-29, you would see a deficit from blue to purple of over $4 million that would be lost in state aid. That's just a non-starter. You can't even have a conversation. Well, the regionalization legislation does allow for a provision in which when they calculate your aid in the year before that, which the 5.8 million in red is before this year, but it would carry through because it's a locked aid. It locks straight across. You can see that ameliorates the deficit a little bit, but not a lot, right? You're still looking at $3 million there. $3 million more operating as separate districts than as regional ones. So why regionalize? Again, a question, and we need to answer that. If we were looking at just the Belvidere cluster, now we take Great Meadows out of this, the story is largely the same. The lines don't change that much. And we're still looking at between the red locked aid of 3.8 million and 5.1 million, a difference of $1.3 million less in aid to regionalize. And so that was where we were in the fall and sort of where we put a pin in things and said, that's a problem. And Mark recognized it right away because Mark was involved in the writing of the regionalization law and knew that this was not the intent of the legislature. It's the way we're reading the law, but it was not the intent of the legislature. And there are key legislators, many of them, who agree with that. And so he is working with them to make some changes to that regionalization law, which we hope to see this year, which would create what we would call a true hold harmless situation. In other words, the ideal is if the state is truly promoting regionalization as a policy initiative, then what you would want to do is every year you make the calculation of state aid, and if in 26-27 it's 4.2, and the state says it's 1.8, then the districts who are regionalized get 4.2. They're held harmless. And so that increase that you see, if this legislation were revised, which we think there's a good chance of that happening, would change in that direction. But that process is going to take some time through this year, hopefully by end of the calendar year. Yeah, kind of what we're looking at. All right, so that's where that stands. What I just explained to you is basically what's on these 2 bullet points. So the changes that are already in S3488, that's the regionalization law, provide some protections, but they're not enough. And so the consultants are seeking clarifying language through the state legislature for a true hold harmless situation. And we'll speak to that, by the way, in our recommendations at the end. Okay? So that's state aid. What about local taxes? Well, when you bring districts together, you can apportion taxes in one of 3 ways. You can either do it based on the equalized valuation of the properties, property wealth, the number of students that are enrolled, or some combination of the 2. You can go anywhere from 0 enrollment to 100% property valuation to 0, 100 the other way, or somewhere in between. Our effort is to try to find what's the sweet spot where we find tax benefits and advantages for all of the districts. Well, what we see right here is part of our problem in trying to identify that. When you look at to the right, independence and liberty, by the way, the darker one is the equalized valuation. That's the property valuation share, if the districts were put together. And the lighter green one is the enrollment share. So you can see in independence and liberty, the enrollment share is a higher calculation right now, just the way their taxes are situated. That's okay for them, because if you look at the 2 of them in isolation, they sort of mirror each other, even though one's lower than the other. Right? It's about 70 to 80% of the enrollment share is valuation, is the valuation. Problem is when you get to the Belvidere cluster, because you see 2 districts, Belvidere and Harmony, who have one situation, or excuse me, Belvidere and Hope, who have one situation, the first and the third, where their enrollment share is higher than the valuation share, and Harmony and White, where it shifts the other way. So now trying to find that balance gets really tricky. It's a unique feature of this cluster. When we've done other districts, we haven't seen that feature, and it's been easier to find targeted savings. So, for the all potential constituents, if they're all together, the optimal level you see at the top is 43% valuation, 57% enrollment. That's the ideal. The ideal is not so ideal. It results in tax savings and benefit for Hope and White, and a negative tax impact for the others. Our ideal is that all of those are in the green. Well, how could that be possible if you're bringing all these districts together? Somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. Not so fast, as they say. What's calculated in here is the expected cost savings of regionalization. So when you add in the cost savings, can you get a tax benefit for the communities? In our other studies, we have found that. Here's the difference here, though. And by the way, I'll pause that for you, and I'm just going to go now to what if we look at just the Belvidere cluster. Again, we see Belvidere and Hope in one situation, Harmony and White in another, and here's how that looks in terms of the tax impact. Again, Hope and White seeing a positive outcome, Belvidere and Harmony not. So, why is that? Why did that work that way? Well, because you've done such a good job of trying to find ways to save money already. Many other districts have not tried what you've tried to do to get administrative savings and other savings, and because you're already seeing those, we can't find as much cost savings in the regionalization fund. Good news of that is you're already doing it, and you can do more of it. The difficulty is, of course, that when we go to do this kind of analysis, we have difficulty. Now, there is an option here, and the option is that while we're trying, this is just repeating what I said. There's no combination of these parameters that produces tax savings for all municipalities. But the legislation does allow for a transitional methodology, which is designed to address these situations and allows the tax impact to be decided, any kind of appropriate tax impact can be decided by the participants and spread out over a 10-year period to limit the shocks, if you will, of any kind of immediate tax impact. So that's there in the legislation, and something worth considering, maybe to dive deeper to find some other cost savings. Maybe that's the case. But right now, where we are, we're not finding enough to do that work. I just said spending and cost savings. First of all, kudos, because the districts are all doing a great job prioritizing direct spending on students. That's not just my opinion. We did the analysis based on the dollars that are actually going to classroom instruction, higher than your peers. You are directing monies to the classroom and to extracurricular activities and to support services. Right? When you look at what you're contributing to administration, largely below the average of your peers. You're doing a great job in terms of where the money is going. But the second bullet point is where we run into trouble, because the estimated cost savings in the current cluster is about $178,000 from a regionalization. With Great Meadows, $558,000. The other districts we did, 1.2, 1.4 million. What happens when you put that into the tax picture? Now you can find scenarios where all 4 of the districts or 5 of the districts are winners. Right now we don't have that situation. And it certainly falls short. We would have to find some 2.7 million in cost savings, which I think would be a challenge, but that would be the place to go and do that. Middle school program. There are definitely efficiencies, financial efficiencies from a grade 6 through 8 combined program. Consolidated administrations, more efficient deployment of staff, reduced curriculum materials costs. But the primary motivation shouldn't be finance. Definitely the primary motivation should be for a great education for your kids. But we still want to be cognizant of the finance piece. So this was the request we got from the steering committee. Can you come up with a model that would give us some idea? And so we did that. What this shows you is, on the left-hand side, large categories of teachers and support staff combined into personnel. You add those two together to get personnel. And then the non-personnel spending. School districts are notoriously similar to one another in that they generally spend around 80% of their money on personnel. It's a labor-intensive business education. So it's teachers, it's counselors, it's nurses, it's all custodians, it's all of these folks. It's a labor-intensive business. The existing costs for each of the 4 sending districts to run those programs is $3.645 million for the 3 sending districts. When you look at Belvidere, what is Belvidere's cost for its grade 6 through 8? It's $1,295,880. You should notice somewhat of a pattern there in that you've got 3 districts working on grades 6 through 8 and another one, and Belvidere's is about a third of the cost, which is sort of what you should expect it to be. That's about right. Put that all together, and you're looking at nearly $5 million in expenditure in the 4 communities for grades 6 through 8. We put together a model of costs, and the costs, by the way, are real numbers. These are average annual teacher salaries with benefits, marking those up by years, looking at aspects of the collective bargaining agreements, etc., to get to a model cost of $3,690,000. Well, how do you get to that? How could that be? Well, if you look across from the 3rd, or the 4th and the 5th column, you see where the majority of that is. It's not non-personnel, it's a couple $100,000, not in support staff, it's in the teaching staff. And why is that? Because when you look at, just take a look at your 8th grades across the 4 districts. Because you have few numbers in each of the schools, if you have 15 kids in the grade, you have 1 class with 15 kids. If you have 26 kids in the grade, you probably don't have a class of 26, but you probably have 2 with 13. Well, it's nice to have classes of 13 and 14. What's wrong with that? Well, it's not very efficient is what's wrong with it. And if you go to closer to the maximums that are suggested by the state, up here to 23, 24, you get to where when you combine them together, you can create classes of anywhere between 21 and 24 kids and have fewer sections, if that makes sense. So fewer need for folks. So that's where the efficiencies come from when you bring folks together. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that you should only spend $3,690,000 for the program. Maybe you want to spend more than that and continue to have teachers who provide additional programs. And by the way, we're talking about providing all the same program you're providing. Art, music, technology, phys ed, health, all of that stuff is true in both of the models, the existing and the future model. But what if you want to explore some additional technology type courses? What if you want to have additional music programs beyond those are things that you can start to look at and add on to create a fuller middle school program. But we're just giving this as a cost analysis right now. I hope that makes sense. There's choices to be made in this. And then when we look at the scenarios, what does that look like in terms of projected tuition per student? If you look at the model, 14,000, you just do a simple division of the 3.6 million with the current 255 students. I said 275 before, that's a future number. We just did it from the current students. And the other one is estimated based on the tuition histories and market comparisons. That's about 18,530. Either one is below the 3.7 million that we talked about before. So the tuitions we have calculated would be less than you would expect to pay per student for doing that work in your own buildings currently. Right? So that's where that is at. I'm going to rip through these last ones. These are some of the operational things. According to the statute, it's the largest school district's collective bargaining agreement that is the one that's first put forward. That would be Belvidere's. It's the largest at each grade level. Well, because Belvidere is a K through 12, it's the largest school district at those grade levels. Their collective bargaining agreement would govern staff. After the initial 3-year period, what happens is when there's a regionalization, negotiations happen immediately, if not before immediately, and most times a new agreement is agreed to. So now there's a new collective bargaining agreement between a new association and a new Board of Education. But right now, Belvidere's is the largest one, so you just need to know that. As I said, that the cluster has really worked hard to establish a lot of efficiencies in shared services. Those are all documented in the study. Great Meadows, of course, is a more independent district, doesn't have as much in that sharing as the others do, but they're a larger district too, so they're able to be efficient on their own. Transportation, we see little to no change. Certainly in a regionalization, because in the cluster, all students would be going to Belvidere, still be going to Belvidere High School. If Great Meadows join in, and rather than send the students to Hackettstown, they send them to Belvidere, it would be a nominal change, and really wouldn't be much of a change at all, because it's a little bit larger distance, but not much of a change. So it can be done without major changes. And under the combined middle school approach, the recommendation is to locate the middle school program here at this site for multiple reasons. I'll get to the reason of the classroom space, but not least of which is that the middle school students from Hope, Harmony, and White could be added onto the high school routes, therefore not adding significant, any cost, not significant anyway. There might be a few extra bus stops, but the same routes could be run virtually to have those students, so we anticipate no significant additional transportation costs. Certainly White could be considered for the middle school program, but then you're transporting kids to Belvidere for high school and to White for middle school. That is additional money, additional runs, so we put that figure in there. Other financial implications, there's kind of a comparable trade-off in the middle school perspective between fewer staff and then tuition to be paid. If you weren't housing your 6th, 7th, and 8th grade staff because you were sending your students elsewhere, you'd be paying tuition for them to go elsewhere. Those costs sort of offset one another. But one consideration, especially for Harmony and Hope, which are very small schools, is that if their grades 6 to 8 students are sent to Belvidere or to White, would leave their schools with much smaller enrollments. I know Hope has had to have some very difficult thoughts and conversations around that. That's not an easy thing to do because reducing school enrollments to that level may exacerbate the issue of not being as efficient as you would like to be. Now to the facilities. This is the last slide here. Belvidere High School has anywhere from a projected 11 to 13 classrooms available over the next 5 years. It may not look like it now because they're spread out. Any school will spread out and utilize the space. But once you start combining kids into slightly larger class sizes, again, under the 24, then there are efficiencies here. And so in the study, you will see each of the school districts and an analysis of each of the schools. As we said before, Belvidere would have sufficient classroom space to house the grades 6 through 8 students, White, the 7th and 8th grade students, and we included Great Meadows in that, one way or the other, it could be accommodated. This is what that facility analysis looks like. This happens to be the specific one for Belvidere High School, where you look at the number of students, full-sized classrooms that are devoted to those students. And by full-sized classrooms, we don't mean small special ed rooms, we don't mean the gymnasium, we're talking about regular classrooms as we're doing that analysis. Separate analysis would need to be done of the capacities of the auditorium and the gym and those as well. But this certainly demonstrates that this site is the one that the data points to. Major recommendations. Only one page of that. We have 4 recommendations, and perhaps you could have guessed them from the analysis that we've gone through. The first recommendation is that when considering an all-purpose grades pre-K to 12 regional school district, either with or without Great Meadows, we're recommending you postpone that discussion. This state aid piece has to get worked out. As I said before, that's just a non-starter. No one's going to regionalize and lose $3 or $4 million of state aid. That's just not going to happen. So that's going to get taken care of first. Then can be the discussion of the tax situation and finding additional cost savings and apportioning that out over 10 years. There's ways to have that discussion. That's when that discussion should happen. So we're saying to you, doesn't mean you can't have informal discussion, doesn't mean you can't talk about it, but serious consideration, we urge you to wait. Okay? The second recommendation is that we recommend you strongly consider further investigation of this grade 6 through 8 middle school program. The educational benefits are there, the financial savings can be there, a richer program at a lower cost. Why wouldn't you talk about that and consider that? And we're hoping White R is sort of a good first step. And Great Meadows could talk to you about their middle school program. They have a fantastic program. All of these things are documented within the study, and so you'd see them there. We do not, the number 3, we do not recommend the closing of Belvidere High School at this time for the reasons we mentioned, the educational program. We don't see significant financial benefits at this time. Again, it's a social and emotional discussion too, and we don't think that's appropriate right now. And the fourth one, we do recommend consideration of additional or enhanced shared services. So as you're potentially postponing a regionalization discussion for a little while, certainly thinking about the additional or enhanced shared services that can go on. You're doing a lot already. Again, really kudos to the districts, to the administrators, to the boards who have already made those decisions. We can't tell you, we look at a lot of school districts and we don't see a whole lot of this, and so you've already done a lot of great work, but we recommend you consider looking at the things. They're strewn throughout, you'll see those different recommendations. It's a 249-page document. I don't recommend reading it unless you're a sleepless night and you want to stay up. That's not probably the way to digest it. There's a 20-page executive summary on the end. All the key findings and at the beginning, all the key findings and recommendations at the end. And at the end of each one of the domains is an impact statement, so you can sort of see about that domain. And the table of contents is linked and clickable. So you go in and say, I want to look at more about this tax situation. Click and it'll take you right to that part of the document. So I think it can be easily digestible. Hopefully you get a chance to read it. I know we worked through this and I probably lost track of the time. 40 minutes, Mike, 40 minutes from when I would have liked to start. So we took a lot of time. I know that it's been a while. I think it was important to get through all of that to give you a full picture of what we've studied. It was, again, 13 months of work, and we're proud to do the work with you, and we'll stay and answer questions that you might have. We'll come around with a microphone, because again, we're live streaming?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, we're live streaming, so if you want to ask those questions and know that members of your community are here to hear those, and either Mark or I can, I think, answer most of your questions. And thanks for your attention.
Sorry, that's if I walk. This should be good. Hi.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it. It's very informative.
Louder?
A green light's on.
Try again.
I'll try to speak louder. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. It was very informative. I am not surprised by your findings with the data as far as extracurricular activities offered and AP classes offered. I've had 3 students come through Belvidere High School, and I'm actually quite pleased with the amount of extracurricular activities and AP classes compared to the size of the school. But my question is, when you analyze this, to me it's not just a question of what is offered, it is the quality of what is offered. So when you analyze this, did you analyze what were the AP scores compared to other schools? What were the SAT scores compared to other schools? So it's all well and good to offer all of these, but is it quality? So I was wondering if you would analyze that and what is the data on that? Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the question. There are SAT scores and AP scores, as well as the New Jersey SLA and JSLA. All of those scores are in there. They are not compared to other high schools, but that's actually a very simple task. New Jersey Department of Education has the school performance reports. You can go on and look up schools in the area or schools that are of similar size, schools in several county region. That's not hard analysis to do to get those numbers and compare them, if that's what you're saying. We did not make those comparisons per se. We were looking at opportunities and comparing the opportunities. Thank you.
Come to the back.
Thank you. I saw that the main recommendation in savings was involving staffing. Did you do an analysis of how many staff members could potentially lose their jobs, and was there any analysis given towards attrition and potentially just not hiring to fill that gap in an interim so that people don't lose their jobs?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, we did not do that kind of analysis. So in a regionalization effort, we're anticipating that that staffing jobs, teaching jobs in particular, would not be lost. The schools would remain as they are in a regional effort for schools, for elementary schools and a high school. In the cluster, if we're just talking about Belvidere cluster for right now. So we were not anticipating that. The savings come from, typically from administrative savings, because you're not really combining schools in a regionalization, you're combining the districts at that level. Right? Right. So a lot of that's been done. That's my point about saying there's not a lot of, and because personnel is 80% of the game, you know, that's where the money is spent. And so looking at that, there's, you know, the districts have, the boards have done a good job in finding those efficiencies. So no, we wouldn't anticipate staff losses. Again, you'd have the same buildings, the same needs for custodians and maintenance, and the kids are the kids. They're getting taught the same way. Teachers, teacher assistants, all that would remain the same. In a combined middle school, certainly if you were looking at efficiencies of bringing, as you would in a single school, you know, if you had 28 students in a grade level, you might have 2 teachers for those students. if you had 20, if the next class had 22, you might think about, maybe we don't need that other teacher. So those kinds of decisions are always being considered. Certainly if you're bringing students together into a shared middle school, there is that opportunity to combine classes, and so we might expect, as you saw the documentation here would show that there would be some expected, again, whether it's attrition, we didn't get to the level of individual teachers, nor really could we. That wasn't the purpose of our exercise, because you would have to go, as I'm sure you know, if you were looking at a seventh grade teacher in a particular school, well, that seventh grade teacher at the beginning of their career might have been a fourth grade teacher. And they have seniority as a fourth grade teacher. So, like, that's a whole lot of arrows to, you'd have to do a much more thorough analysis. We did not, that was not the level that we could go to in this because we were looking at bigger picture items.
So,
Can I add a couple of, can I add to that for a second? Under the old school regionalization law that was in effect up until 2022, there were no protections for teachers in terms of tenure or seniority if a school district regionalized. That is one of the main reasons that there were so few regionalizations. One of the things when we put the law together, we had negotiated the law with the School Board Association, the NJA, all the various interest groups. So if you were to regionalize, everybody who's working at like any district going into a regionalization, their tenure would count, their seniority would count if they had 2 years toward that tenure. In a hope, they would have 2 years toward that tenure in a combined district. Secondly, we always recommend you would be doing an implementation plan if you were actually moving toward a regionalization, or frankly, you'd be doing an implementation plan if you were creating a combined middle school. One of our strongest recommendations, obviously, is for a combined middle school because of its educational benefits. And by the way, that's one way of thinking about it. Combining your middle school is something that would occur as part of your regionalization, so it's almost a step toward regionalization if you wanted to go that route. But the point is, it's going to take you a couple of years. I mean, it's going to, if you were to move forward, we've recommended obviously holding off any regionalization vote until after the legislature fixes the state aid piece, right? So if you voted if you were voting toward the end of the 25, 26 year, you might be regionalizing in July the 1st of 27. If there were a few teacher jobs that might be eliminated, you have a couple years of regionalization to move teachers around and to do it through attrition. I mean, that would be the idea of that.
The largest savings came from the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade combination, correct?
Correct. In a rough estimate, yes.
So my question
That's assuming that no program improvements were made.
So my question is, where did that savings come from, if not from the elimination of staff? Did you just look at the number of students and put them into an arbitrary classroom number? Or was there a deeper analysis?
Yes. Yeah, not an arbitrary classroom number, but a classroom number fitting the 24 or less that the state utilizes. So again, if you looked at, just pick the 8th grades across the 4 clusters, you see class sizes of 13, 14, 18, 20. If you bring them together and then have classes of 22, 23, 24, you clearly don't need as many classrooms, as many homerooms. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, that was done through that analysis. And by the way, the assumptions that were made and all the calculations of that are all in the study. Thanks for the question.
Coming over.
Thank you so much. We all love you.
Bye.
Hi. I kind of have a multifaceted question. What was your criteria in picking the districts for the cluster? And why would you include Great Meadows instead of districts that are closer, for an example, Oxford, that goes to Warren Hills? And with that, how did you then formulate the transportation cost increases over the years from 26 to 29 with Great Meadows in that? You know, bus companies have the ability to choose their number of what they want to charge a school, and if we have districts where no other bus company is, you know, giving us a bid, we're locked into that one number. So where do you get the percentage increases?
Right. So on your first question, the cluster obviously with Belvidere is the existing cluster of K-8s.
Correct.
And so why Great Meadows? Because at the time that the application was being put in, Great Meadows asked to be a part of the study. And so what the study was then designed is knowing that there might be some difficulties because it's not part of the historic cluster, knowing that there may be some issues that we outlined with them withdrawing from Hackettstown, which we sort of course, had an inkling about, but we had to do the study to figure the exact nature of those. So because of all of those reasons, each of the 4 scenarios that we looked at was with Great Meadows and without Great Meadows. So all of that is in, all of those pieces are in the study. So we looked at both. So we as a study group did not make the choice to include Great Meadows. They chose to be in, and the Belvidere cluster said, you know, we'll allow you to be part of the study, that's fine. On the transportation piece, you know, by the time we got to the education and finance pieces where we were doing things together, you know, we didn't do as deep a dive with Great Meadows and it, but you know, Great Meadows has 2 townships, Independence, the larger of the 2, is closer to Hackettstown. Liberty, actually a lot of residents in Liberty are closer to Belvidere than they are to Hackettstown. So without doing a full bidding process, because what you were talking about is the bidding process where, you know, bus companies put in bids and it might only be one company and they sort of charge what they want.
Yeah.
We had our transportation consultant, someone who does this for a living, look through each of these scenarios and provide us with numbers. And again, they came out with that largely within the current Belvidere cluster, if there was a regionalization with nobody changing schools, it really wouldn't be any changes in the bus routes. A middle school, if it's housed at Belvidere, well, there are already buses coming from each of the 3 other communities to Belvidere to bring high school students here. So, you know, putting more students onto those runs would be the least expensive option. And again, for Great Meadows, we didn't do the full cost analysis of exactly how many of these routes that go to Hackettstown. We just used basically the average mileage of homes to there. It's certainly closer to Hackettstown, so there'd be some increase for Great Meadows if they chose to join, in terms of transportation, if they chose to join. And certainly there would be increases for Belvidere in the cluster if the middle school is at Great Meadows and their transportation had to happen there. So again, that's another part of the reason that those crossovers in the middle school of Belvidere cluster kids going to Great Meadows, Great Meadows kids going to Belvidere cluster were not really seriously considered once we looked at all of the pieces that would be part of it. Okay? Thank you.
Can I add to that also? Greater Meadows, and like asked for the asked me included in the study in part because of Hackettstown. I was not interested in a regionalization. There is now discussion going on about it with Hackettstown and Greater Meadows about a regionalizing, and they may be doing their own study. There are one of the issues in the legislation. There's a specific section in the legislation that talks about not allowing any a dissolution of an existing regional that creates a greater racial segregation. The estate is in the middle of a desegregation lawsuit that's been going on for years, and it would be it would be a very difficult decision for the education commissioner to approve Great Meadows joint from the Acts down at this point, especially if they're going to look at a regionalization. Together with Great Meadows from the start, Great Meadows is very interested in a K through 12 regionalization, which regards a positive thing. Yeah.
Thank you. I just have a quick clarifying question in regards to education and program with Belvidere High Schools, how you got some of your information. So you talk about the course offerings. So when you look at course offerings, are you looking at what's in the program of studies, or are you looking at what's actually running in the district?
We are looking at program of studies specifically, but to your point, we made points in there to absolutely say that the likelihood is in larger schools, more of those courses would be running, and so, fully being offered and running. That's clearly stated in the
Right, okay.
So you're right.
Okay,
We looked at the potential offerings, and if students choose those offerings, then those courses are going to run. It's kind of the way it works.
Right, but I mean, if you have 300 and something kids in a school and you have 5 kids that choose it, the course isn't going to run.
Right.
Right, okay.
Yeah, no, understood.
All right, I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. We acknowledge that. There definitely are advantages to size in terms of curriculum offering. There's no question about that. There's also, I will tell you, one of the things we did was interviews with, again, various staff, including teaching staff, and it became also very clear that the staff here is very proud of the small size and getting to know students very well. And that paying a lot of dividends education as well. We mentioned that in our study as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, my question is that when you're taking and regionalizing these schools, if you're taking classrooms that are, let's say, 10 to 15 students in size, and then you're merging them, you're going to have, let's say, 20 or 25 students, how is that affecting the quality of the learning for the children with now an increased size of students in the classroom?
So, good question. In a typical regionalization, the schools remain the same. So that would likely not happen. In other words, Army still operates its school with its kids, Hope with its kids, White, etc. In a typical regionalization, because the regionalization is of the district offices, not of the schools remain largely the same. Does that make sense? For a typical regionalization. Okay. Well, typically that's how, in most regional efforts, it's the district offices that combine, not the schools. The schools remain as they are. And that's the way, that is the working assumption that we made in this study, that if the Belvidere cluster decided to regionalize, that Hope would have a school, Army would have a school, White would have a school, Belvidere Elementary, and they would still go to Belvidere High School. Where we see the change, and I think where you're pointing to, is this idea of a combined 6th through 8th grade program. So if those students came together, yes, we would be looking at class sizes more on the order of 20 to 24. I think the average right now in those classes is probably 17 or 18, because some have 22 and some have 13. But that's almost, and the folks who are familiar with grade levels in the schools, as you may be, that's almost an accident of what that grade level happens to have. So this year's grade 6 might have 13 kids, and next year's might have 25. So we're going to have a very different experience perhaps for this. 25 might have been a bad example because maybe we wouldn't want a class, but 21. And so you would immediately be changing the sizes of the classes, where in a combined setting, you would have much more consistency year to year because you're talking about a larger group of kids. If there were fewer kids in one grade level than another, it doesn't truly impact. That said, in order to get significant, the class size literature is that you're not going to get significant educational benefits going from a class of 24 to 18. And when you go to a class size of 15 or lower, those benefits are seen primarily in grades pre-K to 3. for that individual attention. And of course, you have to teach differently. If you're teaching the same way when you're teaching 24 as when you're teaching 13, it's not going to show a great deal of difference in terms of the education. I'm just citing some of the research. So we just believe that there would be more consistency and, of course, as we said, more of an ability to have a stronger program. So, yeah, so hand up here. Oh, there and then here. Okay. There.
Hi. I don't know if you can answer this, but in looking at sharing services, I'm big on vocational. And as we know, Warren County is one of the few counties that we can't do shared services. Not in 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, or shared time. It's got to be full-time, one-shot deal, 9th grade. And in looking at enrollment, not just in Belvidere, but in this county, I think we're going to have a real hard time getting people to come in here if they have children who are not college-bound and they want more vocational opportunities. So I don't know if the study looked at that at all, sharing other vocational with other schools, Phillipsburg.
No, to be honest, we did not look at that. The sharing we were looking at was among the districts themselves, whether it's curriculum services or special education programs or other things like that we took a look at. The kind of thing you're talking about very often is a one-sided decision made by the technical school. It doesn't have to be. It certainly could be an object of conversation by the school districts, and not just from this cluster, but throughout the county, wanting to see shared time programs being re-offered again, because we know that they used to be. And there's absolutely a segment of our students who could very, very much use those programs. So I agree with you.
I saw that one over here someplace.
Right over here, right here, Mark, on the center aisle. Center aisle.
I apologize because I missed the beginning of this presentation. So I have a comment, and it might not pertain to what you discussed. Two things. When I was growing up, I went to a very large high school. We had a principal and a vice principal. I feel like we're very top-heavy here. I don't understand why we're so top-heavy about here. As far as administration goes, I just don't feel like we're talking about efficiencies, and I feel like that's something that, you know, if it's not looked into, it needs to be looked into, because you have a dean of students, vice principal, principal, this one, that one, it's like 5 different administrators. I just think for a school this size, if you're talking about efficiencies, that needs to be addressed, because I don't understand the need really for a dean of students in this school, and there might be a place for it, but I just feel like there's inefficiency in administration. So that's one comment. Number two, I'm sorry. Number two, as someone who has a daughter who's in 9th grade and a daughter who's a junior in college who actually went to Belvidere, she really had a great experience here at Belvidere. But what I have found talking with her and other students who have graduated here that have gone through COVID, and this is something that some people might not agree with, they are struggling in college. A lot of them are struggling in science and in math. And when you're talking about the quality of education, these things need to be addressed to help those kids that were COVID kids get through so they can be successful in college, because a lot of them are failing in core courses in college right now. You might not know, and I know a report wasn't done. I had talked to Ms. McKinney, or Dr. McKinney, I apologize. I talked to her about that, and you know, a study being done or whatnot, and I know that that would be very hard, but I'm here to tell you as a parent that talking to other parents, the kids out there that are graduating from here, COVID kids are struggling in some subjects. And we're talking about kids that were ranked number 16, number 11, who had over 4.0s at Belvidere. It's not that I think the teachers are bad, it's not that I think they're doing a bad job, but I'm talking about the quality of education. There's a piece missing, that if we're talking about regionalization, something needs to also be worked in to help these kids so they can be successful. And I'm not sure where the cutoff is. I know that they said it was first grade of the class of whatever, that wasn't impacted by COVID, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed in the study. That's, sorry.
Just one thing, this is a statewide and a national issue. The chair of the Senate Education Committee, Teresa Ruiz, is really focused on that, and we see it in the school districts across the state. So that's something, and it's something that they're talking about.
Sorry, I just want to make one more comment. And I appreciate that, but when we're paying $45,000 a year for college and my kid has to take these courses once or twice because they're having a hard time because they didn't have the core that they needed from high school, that's a problem. So I just want to put it out there that they need something extra here. I don't know what it is, but it's something that needs to be looked into.
So you made comments. I usually don't want to respond to comments, more questions. So I'll leave your comments, like, you said what you said, and that's fine, I understand that. I can tell you from a COVID standpoint, I was superintendent in Newton when COVID hit. We worked our way through that and came out the other side and are still addressing it. We are working with a large number of school districts on regionalization studies, and I have colleagues, I can tell you, all over the state. This is not an isolated experience. This is being felt all over the state. So that's important. I just want you to know that you're not alone, we're not alone. These issues are certainly there. From an administrative standpoint, the part you missed probably earlier was when I talked about the administrative efficiencies that have already been worked on in these districts. And I can tell you from my experience with other districts, there's a lot going on here in terms of administrative job sharing that is not going on in other districts. So I just will put that out there. And the last part would be that the first thing you missed is when Mr. Karuba came up and said, if you have questions about lots of other things, show up at the April 16th meeting, and we'll be glad to hear that. So, but thank you for your comments. We appreciate that. Thank you. We have a couple more questions.
Hi. I just want to say that I tried to look at the document that was sent that was 275 pages, and I think this is an amazingly comprehensive study, and I really appreciate all the work and the time and consideration that's put into this. I'm just in awe of all of this. Thank you. And I also want to ask, is it going to come up again that Belvidere High School, they're considering closing the high school? Is that going to come up again soon? How soon? And I'm assuming based on whatever happens with the legislature and the funding. So how soon are we going to have to hear this again, like maybe Belvidere will close?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are questions that the community has to answer and perhaps talk with the Board of Education. We're leaving it with, after that full study that you took a look at, we are not recommending the closure of Belvidere High School. That's very plain in our and that's at this time. Things can change over time. Would that discussion happen at some time in the future? That's really up to the communities to decide whether they want to have that discussion. Right now, we're not recommending it.
No, I don't know if this is, you said this in questions that didn't pertain to this at the end. But my daughter's a senior, is a junior this year, and she'll be graduating next year. What happens if she's in the middle of her year, school starts and we get a notice that the school will be closing, and what happens to her as a senior? I mean, when is all this really going to happen? That's my concern because she's graduating. She only has one more year.
No, that's a legitimate concern. The transition, if the transition is going to happen sometime in the future, there are students who, would have some impacts. At this time, again, we're not recommending a regionalization discussion at this time until the state acts, which, if at best, is by the end of this calendar year. Then you talk about, most of these discussions about regionalization take years. All that the districts have done at this point is they've had a study. It answers a lot of questions. It perhaps raises a lot of other questions which need to be answered. So I think you're probably far enough away from that shouldn't be a concern.
Thank you.
So while you guys were looking at the class sizes, I know you said it wouldn't affect special needs kids, but you were looking at how we had extra classrooms. And I know for a fact that there's a couple kids who have like special needs who need 5 credits maximum per class. Did you take that into account with like the adding the extra kids?
We did, because we're aware that there are classes that are currently being used. Some of them are classes that are built for that size. At times, classes can also be retrofitted if they're large, regular-sized classrooms, can be retrofitted to accommodate smaller groups of students, 6, 7, 8 students at a time. We're well aware that the building is used differently, and so our recommendation of placing a middle school program here was not with a razor's edge of just slipped in. There's room to be had, and again, schools will do. This is not a critique. School, just like you will in a home. You might be 4 people in a huge home. You don't really need that huge home, but I guarantee every one of those rooms is going to have stuff in it and get used. You'll spread out to the space that you have. But that's why we looked at the state's facility documents, the long-range facility plans, in making those recommendations. But we are well aware that there will continue to be small-sized classes for special education students. We're well aware of that.
Okay, and the other question is this for all children or like the reorganization? Would it be for all of the Great Meadows kids or mainly just the high school kids?
Well, when we were talking about regionalization, the scenario that we looked at was a full pre-K to 12. So one scenario that we looked at was a full regionalization of kids at all of the grade levels, yes.
Sorry, I missed 15 minutes of
All right, let's see.
yeah.
I'm only kidding.
Again, it was answered already. But what I understand from the regionalization is that it's the cost saving coming from the economy of scale, where you're reducing the number of students from those regions where there are not too many students already, and putting them in the district where they have less students but they can be added there. The question is, have you considered the demographic aspect as well? Because if most of the students will be going to a certain regional school, then as a parent, if they have a kid in 6th or 7th grade, why would they even choose to stay in that town? Because it's not just the school that you can bus the students for the schooling part, but there are extracurricular activities, there's soccer, this, that, whatever, where the parents have to drop the kids and things like that. So why would the parents choose to stay in Hope and not stay in Belvidere or Great Meadows? So the change in demography will also impact the cost saving that you are showing. Right? So was that taken into consideration?
Yes, so we did a piece, and maybe missed that earlier, that there was a demographic analysis done to project enrollment over the next 5 years, looking at that specifically. So that was definitely taken into account. The comment you made about regionalization, though, again, I know this is a point that is often not well understood. Regionalization generally is school district regionalization, the district office. It usually does not change what's happening at the school levels. Where we're confusing that is another scenario that we looked at was combining middle school students into one location. So in that case, middle school students would be in one place instead of spread through the 4 communities. Provides educational benefits, we saw some cost savings, etc. To your point about athletics and activities, that's a good one. Because currently most of the athletics that are offered are recreational athletics offered by the townships. They are not run by the schools. Where when you have a combined middle school program with 6th, 7th, 8th grade students, you may have enough students that you could actually run school programs, school athletic programs to compete against other schools, which happens, middle schools do that, and provide an opportunity that doesn't currently exist. So just the opposite, I think, of your concern that there would be less opportunities. Yes, if your student then participated in the school level activity that is not in your township, would there be some more parent transportation needed? Possibly. I also know of communities where when they have middle school sports, they run an after-school middle school bus to take students home. So that's also a possibility. When we showed cost savings up there, cost savings doesn't mean tax break. That doesn't mean all this, whatever money you see as a difference just goes back to the taxpayers. That's a decision for that Board of Education to make. They could choose to take some of that savings and produce additional programs, like I just suggested, a middle school sports program that also has an after-school bus with it. Or where we now have club activities that are run by schools, and again, parents are coming from all directions to pick up their students after the club program. If it's in one location, again, a larger group, stronger group could have some more academic competitions against other schools, and again, potentially some transportation options. So there's lots of opportunity there. I wouldn't assume that it necessarily is a diseconomy of scale because of that.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Just one quick comment. If Lucille Davy was here, who is the former education commissioner, she'd be talking about the advantages of like having your 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students all using the same math book, the same science curriculum, reading the same assignments like English and history, and your 9th grade teachers will not be getting kids in at different levels who've gone through different programs and are at different stages. Some have had these math concepts, others have had those math concepts. There's a real advantage to a curriculum coordination. You don't have to regionalize it, do it as Ken pointed out, but there are real opportunities for curriculum coordination within the Belvidere cluster that is not currently going on. That would be easier either when they combine to middle school or with full regionalization. Yes.
Sorry.
All right, good.
No, so
They could go on the other side.
So as far as regionalizing the middle schoolers, in that scenario, we're talking about bringing together more numbers. In the report, in the NJSLA, all the percentages were lower for higher classes. So kind of back to the whole quality of education, is there any sort of report or anything that that we can read on increasing the class size and also raising up education?
Specific research studies, are you talking about that?
Yeah, because everything that I've known is when you raise the class, education goes down. And it kind of directly also reports to Belvidere. Belvidere has way more kids. They're like 30%, 35% in NJSLA. And if you look at the other school districts, they're a lot higher.
Yeah, there's lots that goes into the scores. I think that's a perception about class size that's not borne out by the research. You have to reduce class size significantly and consistently to get gains, and those are typically the pre-K to 3, as I said earlier. That's where the research is strong about class size reduction, but it's an awfully expensive proposition. You know, if you think of a class of 12 versus 24, it's twice as expensive.
Yep.
So are you getting twice as good an education? Really, I think the research is clearer about, having good teachers in classrooms. And again, I'm not saying that it wouldn't be an advantage to have fewer students to know and get to know well. That certainly is an advantage. But those are discussions
Like
that...
any sort of like external report or anything that you recommend other than that?
The sort of gold standard among that is the STAR study, which was done in Tennessee.
That was the opposite though.
No. It showed that there were academic gains that you had to bring classes from 25 and above down to 15, and you had to do it over multiple years, and it was, the effects were seen pre-K to 3.
Okay.
So that's sort of some old history. I'm sure there's some newer.
Yeah, it's under the 80s.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some newer material.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I saw the recommendation one, this was to combine the middle schools. What is the next step? Is it the White Township, Hope Township, Belvidere, the Board of Education's come together and they put together a proposal that gets voted on, or that doesn't get voted on at all? I'm trying to remember what you said. I think regionalization you said had to get approved and voted on. I thought you said middle schools didn't have to, or maybe it didn't have to get approved by, what is the next steps, right? That this committee put their recommendation out, what's next?
So the next steps in general is following the studies that, we would hope the communities would step back, the boards would take a look at these and look at the proposals and have some serious conversations about the recommendations. It could be a conversation about that, but we also recommended a number of enhanced shared services opportunities, so it could be that. I spoke in the beginning about what's the good faith effort that the boards, and the good faith effort we believe is simply, taking an honest look at the report, having public conversations at board meetings and starting to converse about what we would think about, moving forward with it, why would we do that. Maybe there's some aspects of that need a closer scrutiny, a little bit more study. Than just maybe some general things that we did in our book, although again, 250 pages, there's lots of stuff to read in there. I would certainly encourage digesting that. But to answer your broad question is, changing the send-receive relationships is a Board of Education level decision. That now, certainly I would expect boards of education want community input. They want to hear what people think. I'm sure it's not going to be anything but a very public discussion. But ultimately, those are decisions that boards make. And remember, if 4 communities wanted to come together to do this, all 4 boards of education would have to agree to do it for all 4 of them to come together. So I think there's much yet to be done. This is just providing some information to get started. There's no specific path from here, I think, is the answer to tell you.
Anyone else?
All right. Well, listen, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you spending some extra time with us. All of the questions were really good. Hopefully you walked away with learning something. Continue to have the discussion with your board members and your community members. I'd like to thank the Belvidere Board of Education and Chris Green for having us here. Thank you all very much.